Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. So today we're gonna look into how to find multi-baggers or 10 baggers as they say in the stock market. So these are the stocks that you see basically increase by multiple times in short period of time. For example, like 10x, 20x and so on. So if you are interested to find stocks that are getting this kind of headlines, for example in AMD, this is from a few years back, then stick around. So let's get straight into it. So how do we find 10 baggers? Well, first of all, you have to find your candidates. So your next question should be, how could I find my potential candidates? So in my opinion, in my experience, the best way is to find a trend. For example, one of these trends is like when people started to streaming in possibly like 10-12 years ago with Netflix. Before that you used to buy basically these CDs and DVDs and all this other kind of stuff, or even some people were downloading movies. But then comes along Netflix and offers a new service, and then bam, you'll see just it's exploding. All of a sudden you have Netflix, HBO, Amazon Prime and all these other options out there. Or one other trend could be, for example, this is not that far ago to be honest, like let's say 2015, 16, 17, when Tesla already was known on the market. Okay, you could say that they were not as big and as they are now, but they were still a really interesting company, and most people, if you would have studied, you would have probably have felt the feeling that the electric cars would be for the future. Or maybe still to this day the solar stocks, the photovoltaics. So yeah, the biggest thing here is to find a trend that is somehow growing and that you trust in, and you feel quite confident that there will be future growth, not for 1 or 2 years, but I'm talking for like 10 years at least. Next step I would say is to find companies with small market caps. So let me see if I can show you an example. One company that I found that I'm still talking to this day about a lot. So AMD, as you saw in these headlines. So speaking of AMD, if you go back to a few years ago, this article is from 2017, March 2017, and you see here, if you read the headline is basically saying that this is the moment that AMD's finally been waiting for almost a decade. So in the last decade, before 2017, AMD was just nowhere near to be found for most part of that decade. They had so many troubles in their product lineup, so Intel was just taking market share all the time. So if you look at this data here, again our good friend Statista. So look at the numbers for the x86. So basically, for those of you guys that are not so into this market, this is basically the market share of the computers roughly, and you can actually see it, like AMD were kind of competitive until 2012, and this is where basically you would see that the new products would start to struggle against Intel's. And let's see, I believe like I started to invest in AMD somewhere around here in 2016, and look at it, like this is where basically Intel actually peaked. So if you look at this data here, you would almost look like a fool to invest in AMD in this area unless you would have known something, which I did. So let's say here, from roughly that time of from roughly that year, you can see at the end of 2016, read this headline here: AMD shows how Zen, now renamed Ryzen, is the best chip family in a decade. So okay, when you see these kind of headlines, and if you do your bit of research, then you probably will find an opportunity once seeing this kind of market dominance from Intel. So there's an opportunity here. Intel is dominating and they will have a challenger possibly. So let's go back to our points here, and you can see, so small market cap as I said. So from this where Intel was dominating in this stage, you can actually look it up in AMD's market capitalization at that time. I believe I have saved it here. So in this graph you can see the blue line is Intel and the red line is AMD. So in this area here around 2017, just before their new product started to basically take place in the shops, AMD's market cap was around 8, just below 8 billion. And even if you go back, I didn't put 2015 and 16 here, but if you look at the numbers from 2015 and 16, we are talking like 3 billion, 4 billion, whereas Intel is sticking around at this stage at around 200 billion. So we are talking almost of 100x difference in market capitalization, which means that Intel would, on the market, Intel was like 100 times larger than AMD. And there was some basis to that. Again, look at these numbers here, 80%, 83% to 17. So they were definitely dominating the market. But you could argue with these kind of headlines, with them launching Zen and taking market share away from Intel, if AMD would have been successful, as time has shown they have been, look at this now, look at the difference here from like going to 82 and they are now at 60, and it's a big difference, and especially for AMD, like going from 17 at the bottom to more than doubling. And to be honest, I believe that we are going for even more. So again, if my thesis back then was, if AMD would claw back market share, how much more valued would the company be on the stock market? So that's a big question. So these kind of backgrounds, these kind of details is what's allowing you to find a possible 10 bagger. So we looked at it that they have small market cap in 2015, 16, 14, and also they are operating in a market that is very big. So this TAM stands for total available market. So basically at the time that Intel had revenues of, let me see, I believe I have it here somewhere. Yeah, so look at it. So if we go back to that time, again, in middle of the last decade, Intel's revenue was hovering around 55 to 65 billion each year. Now, look at AMD's. They were like, yeah, 3, 4, 5 billion. So it's just not comparable. They were on a totally different universe. Not even different league. They were like in total different universe. So again, looking at the price to sales ratio of those companies, and you could see actually that Intel was not that highly valued, you know, less than 3 times their sales. Again, if you remember the market cap that I show you here, here. So you could see at the time Intel was sitting around 200 billion US dollar in market cap, and AMD like between 4 to 8. And then their revenue at the same time for Intel was 60 billion and AMD, let's say 5. So these numbers in terms of market cap, revenue, and again the market share, which is very important, gives you the kind of signal that you want. Okay, there is a potential if the product is good. And again, I was so confident back then that AMD was really gonna hit all the performance targets with their Zen lineup, first in the desktop and then in the servers. And this is actually what we have seen in the last few years. So look at the market share, as we spoke again, like they're just taking market share from Intel, and I don't believe that the bleeding is ended here. So that also, yeah, that is basically how you find a possible 10 bagger. Let me see if I missed any points here. So yeah, as you see, also I wrote down here that usually it's an underdog, which is in this case it is. AMD was the underdog, and they are basically going to challenge the market leader. And sometimes it's actually a startup or a new company with or even an existing company with an interesting product. Think about this, for example, Apple in 2005-6, just before the launch of the iPhone, or maybe a startup. Well, Netflix wasn't a startup actually, but you could say that a startup of a new service for them with their streaming side of things. So again, and also in this case, I guess like the biggest example in the last 3 years is Tesla. I mean, most people knew that electric cars would be the future. So if you would have just studied if you would just have looked at the fundamentals of the company, it would be, in my view, actually a non-brainer to invest in Tesla in 2019. I think I started to invest in Tesla in late 2018. But don't worry, there's many other options out there for the future, especially in this kind of market where there's really struggling. Those kind of companies, those like future growth companies, are struggling in the last 18 months. So there's companies out there to find. And also, one very absolutely fundamental and important point of view here is, now let's say you find one of your candidates. It's very important to educate yourself in the market you're looking at. Look at the sector. Is it in life science? Then you have to understand the fundamentals, the basics of life science. If you're gonna put aside, let's say, 1/4 or half of your investment capital into one single company or two companies, you really need to educate yourself in that market. So I wasn't so educated in semiconductors back then, but I actually took a course in the university and also started to follow in right people like industry insiders, following the right podcast, finding right people on Twitter, and just getting a wealth of information day in, day out, year in, year out. I was reading the subreddits every day. I was looking at Twitter, rumors, everything you could find, I was reading. So this gave me the confidence to actually invest. I think at some point I had 60 or 70% of my money in just AMD. So this is like 2016, 17, 18 and 19. So let me just show you an example of like industry insiders or people with well-known information in this area. So an example from yesterday. So yesterday AMD's stock, as you can see, was as 82. So it had basically lost almost 10% earlier in the week because of the report, and the market didn't like the report. So, and then just from out of nowhere, it just jumped up to almost the same amount, 10% in like matter of like 10 minutes. So, and this is due to there were like rumors that Microsoft were investing in AMD's AI chips. Basically combined effort to tackle Nvidia. So the stock just take through the roof in like 10-20 minutes. And then I followed my information channels. For example, this guy with Silicon Memes. Through him, I found this guy called Dylan Patel. And according to him, it's actually a false rumor. Now, we don't know, maybe this will happen in the future. But from what I know, this looks like it's incorrect information. So CNBC and Bloomberg and all those headlines that basically pushed this message yesterday, they have now actually redacted their data and changed the stance on this matter. So again, this is just one example to show you how to find the right people to follow. And I have this is another rumor that I saw last week, that AMD is somehow going to go to Samsung for the 4nm process. But looking at the sources that I have found, I think this is just not, at least on large scale for the moment. So you have to know what you are looking for. So find your right people. Like for example, in the semiconductor industry, I really like this SemiWiki webpage. So there are like a lot of information out there to basically give you confidence in your investment. So let's see if I've missed everything or so just to show you, they had the small market cap, they have the large market they were operating in, and they were the underdog. And we looked at that. So for the future, probably in the coming weeks, I will look at Canadian Solar. But I think for my next 10 bagger potential, I'm gonna talk about Intel, which is very strange for most people, but I think this company has actually potential if they execute everything well to be almost 10 bagger, at least a 5 bagger in the next coming few years. So thank you for taking your time, and please make sure to like the video and subscribe, and also put down your comments if you think I can improve anything. Thank you for your time.